teens. Thank you for being here. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to do this. And I saved for this specific time because you guys. So, I did a whole bunch of research online. So, before I get into that, I wanted to circle back to, because this is a whole big thing, but I'm going to circle back to the word Apu, which is again one of the Incan words for what we now call God or a supreme being or something so powerful and terrific. And I was saying that there are names of mountains after. Well, I can't find any specific mountains. So Machu Picchu, so you will see the letters, like Machu Picchu has P A or A P U in the name. Like the letters are there, but you don't hear it directly in the name. And I think that's the same with Pachamama, is the way it's spelled. Apu is in the name. Yeah. And so, again, this is, I kind of see it as me trying to almost like interpret it in a colonial way. And no, that was not, it's much bigger than that. Like, the way it is described from the mountain places or sacred rocks or sacred cities, they all are considered an Apu. It would be like calling Gaia, right? That is the name that we've given, but it's beyond a goddess in the kind of westernized idea of a goddess. Okay, so also linking to the Incas. So here's what I had fun doing today. We've been talking about time and how I have theories around Sirius, Orion, and the Pleiades, and I went down a path and it has been really fun and also somewhat mind-blowing. So I'm going to share with you guys all of the information that I discovered today. So it started like this. I had been inquiring about the Pleiades and stories linking the Pleiades to different groups, different tribes, and also the Great Mother, right? Or the Great Mothers. Because I've heard that there are 9 sisters, but I stand corrected. The story is 7 sisters and 2 more stars and possibly more stars. Okay, so I was wondering if there are stories about the Pleiades all over the continent. And so I started asking about the Pleiades in North America and in other places. Well, actually, when I brought up the Pleiades, who was first brought to my attention were the Dogons. And many of us are aware of the Dogon because they have stories of star beings that had come down and taught them things about Sirius, and they have a deep connection to Sirius. Well, they also have a very deep connection to the Pleiades and have entire stories around that, specifically using the Pleiades to time keep. So they're paying attention to the stars of the Pleiades to figure out when to plant, when to have certain ceremonies, when to harvest. The Pleiades. So we're talking timekeepers. Then I asked about North America, and so then there are the Hopi, and the Hopi have stories It is, anyhow, it is amazing. The Hopi have stories also around the Pleiades and harvest and ceremonies and timekeeping. Okay, I said okay, because this is how bad I can be about research. I assumed that the Dogon lived at a different part of the continent. They are specifically Mali, which is northern hemisphere of Africa. It's above the equator, right? Okay, so then I was like, okay, are there stories from, say, Mesoamerica and, say, South America about the Pleiades and or creation stories? Because also in common with the Hopi and the Dogon is that their creation stories, that they started in the middle of Earth, and that star beings, or in an underworld realm, and that star beings or ancestors led them through each realm to here. Is it the realms in the inner Earth, or are these the realms that people are talking about that might be, also part of this planet's spaceship that we're on? Ultimately, they both have similar creation stories. They are on opposite sides of the planet. And I was like, this goes back to the mothers. This has to go back to the great mothers. So, okay. So then I asked about Southern America as southern continent, South America, and South Africa. And the two tribes I specifically asked about were the Amazonian peoples, people who live near the Amazon, which are linked to the Incas, but also the Osha people, or Xhosa people, and sometimes pronounced Xhosa people of South Africa. Well, I found out several things. Did you know? Like I said, there's different names for different star beings and groups and goddesses. So each group, yes, they do have different names for the Pleiades. Get this, hold on. Oh my gosh. I was like, what? Okay, before I get there. So the Pleiades are associated with animals, seasons, deities, ancestors. They're not just stars. They are literally connected to us, are a lot of the stories. Okay, I'm just going to continue. So the Amazonian peoples, South America. So many indigenous Amazonian tribes, there are many, such as the Tucano, Shipibo, Canibo, and the Caxina Awa. They all have star-based cosmologies that include the Pleiades. And here are some of the patterns found in the Amazonian stories. Seasonal timekeepers. The Pleiades are used to track planting and hunting seasons. Okay? And for them, it was when the Pleiades rise before dawn, and that is called a heliacal rising. It signals the beginning of the rainy season or the best time to plant certain crops, like Mennonic, which I now have to look up. Okay. Animal associations. Some Amazonian groups link the Pleiades to birds, fish, or insects, often symbolic of abundance or specific behavior patterns. The stars are sometimes seen as animals that guide or protect the jungle. Okay. Ancestral spirits. In various traditions, the stars of the Pleiades are seen as spirits of ancestors, especially female or maternal spirits who watch over the earth from above. Shamanic journeys. For groups like the Tucano, the stars, including the Pleiades, are destinations or pathways in visionary states, especially during ayahuasca ceremonies. The Pleiades may represent a council of beings or a gathering of feminine energies. Okay, now we're going to go to the Xhosa people. And they are a Bantu-speaking people that are in South Africa. And the Pleiades are known as Ishiamela or Isiamela. And they carry important agricultural and spiritual meaning. New Year marker. The heliacal rising of Isiamela in June, or the Pleiades in June, signals the beginning of the agricultural year. It is a time for plowing, planting, and renewal, spiritual renewal. This time is also linked to ancestral blessings, the spiritual preparation ceremonies. Okay? Honor the ancestors and good harvest. Ask for good harvest. Star as a messenger. The Pleiades are sometimes described as messengers or celestial helpers. They arrive to wake the earth and bring life after the winter rest. Femininity and fertility. While not always explicit, some researchers suggest that Isiamela is connected to the feminine fertility due to its role in renewing the land, aligning it to symbolically with motherly or nurturing forces. So I started seeing this across the board. And then have you heard of the Blue Light Sisterhood? They're also somewhat linked to the Pleiades. And then, so what you find is Maya and Aztec, the Pleiades. They are linked to the new fire ceremony, making the end of a 52-year cycle. So when we talk about the calendar, whose calendar are we going off of? Ancient Egyptians, Sirius, heliacal rising marked the annual flooding of the Nile. And Orion, also known as Sa, was linked to Osiris. And there's a whole thing inside the Encyclopedia of Women's Myths and Secrets that talks about Osiris and his link to the modern known deity or person as Jesus. Okay. Anyways, that's very interesting. So it's all very interesting because the Pleiades were less emphasized in surviving texts but are believed to be tied to the followers of Horus. The Maori and Aotearoa and New Zealand. The Pleiades are Matariki. The Maori New Year tied directly to planting and remembrance of ancestors, based on the Pleiades. Dogon, Mali. As we've discovered, their system is incredibly intricate. Sirius, Orion, and the Pleiades all play roles in origin stories, agricultural cycles, and interdimensional navigation. Then you have the Xhosa and Zulu, South Africa. The Pleiades, Isiamela, mark the start of the planting season and time to honor the ancestors. Hopi and Pueblo, North America. The stars, including Orion's belt and the Pleiades, align with sacred sites and were used to mark solstices, equinoxes, and ceremony times. Japanese and Greeks, even the name Pleiades comes from Greek mythology, seven sisters. The Japanese call it Subaru. If you didn't know that. I feel like I heard that before, but I didn't put it together with the Pleiades. Then it has long been used in calendrical reckoning. The Pleiades. Okay, so then I asked, who switched this? Because it sounds like across the world, as I specified before, what you don't see is the Gregorian calendar, the 12 zodiacal calendar. You don't see that. You don't see that in history. You see the stars. You do see links to the stars and stories of links to the stars, but you don't see the Gregorian calendar. Okay, so just side note, the Subaru means, in Japanese, means to unite or to gather together. And it also refers directly to the Pleiades star cluster. The Subaru logo is literally 6 stars, representing the 6 companies that merged into one. But in Japan, the Pleiades are known as a group of 6 visible stars, which makes the symbolism even more potent. And then I linked this to like Mazda, and that's linked to Ahura Mazda, which is a god of wisdom and divine intelligence and ancient memory. And so, okay. So I asked, when did it switch? So we're going to a little detail about each one of these constellations. The Pleiades, the time to plant, and the Dogon had it to where if you saw a certain star at a certain, same with the Hopi, a certain star at a certain time, it meant it could even signal migrating, but it meant planting or harvesting. I mean, intricately, based on these constellations. Okay, Orion, warrior messenger energy, often connected to hunting, direction, or thresholds. As I spoke before, it's also has been known as Artemis, and it also has feminine names. Okay, Sirius, initiator of floods, new cycles, or messages from beyond, especially in Africa and Egypt. And the Dogon. Okay, this is a form of what they call living sky wisdom and was passed on through oral traditions, observation, and ceremony. Okay, not through written horoscopes or planets placed into charts, even though that's literally something I've been doing. Oh my gosh. Okay, now, when did it shift, I asked, because we're going to get into it. There's a story. The Mother Maidens are also known as the Pleiades. Almost all of the groups I mentioned have a mother specifically, or the elders specifically are given to the name of the Pleiades. They are always feminine. They are always peaceful and loving. They are always feminine. Like, it's across the board. And then outside would be the belt of Orion, or Orion in general, and then Sirius. And then we've talked about how in certain places those names have changed, but also what I recognized is in one of the Mesoamerican names, which I had to pause because I needed to pause for a moment, is that they have a deity whose name is Chakaana, or Shakaana, and I was like Shekinah? Okay, so when did it start? The shift from star-based feminist cycles, because literally the Pleiades are used around the world to specifically get the harvest and the necessary things done when it comes to food and agriculture specifically, and then also some ceremonies, okay, for across the board. So when did it shift? Post-Babylon era, 600 to 400 BCE. And again, we just talked about, there were a whole bunch of calendars before this, but this is what I got. Babylon created mathematical astronomy, okay, and began systemizing planets and star movement into zodiacs, which are houses, right? They reduced, they changed the sky into chart, which later influenced Greek and Roman systems. This is when the Pleiades and fixed stars started getting downgraded in significance. Then Greek Hellenistic astrology, 200 BCE to 200 CE, before Christian era. Ugh. Okay, the Greeks, Ptolemy, etc., formalized the 12-sign zodiac, Ptolemy, okay, and began focusing on the 7 visible planets, which we've talked about because that's supposedly the story that we used to tell time, or they've come up with this based on the planets that we can see with our eyes. Well, 2 of them are not actually planets. They're celestial objects. One is a star, one is the moon. The rest are planets, but also not in the order that they're close to the planet. So I'm getting into that. I go into more of that. Okay, then, all right, the Greek Hellenistic astrology, Ptolemy, the 12 zodiac signs, 7 visible planets, which I talked about, communal, shifting from the astrology of communal ceremonial timing and personal fate prediction. So it went from the community, because you would need to know when to plant and harvest and such like that for the entire community, where as it started shifting to being a little bit more patriarchal and a little less feminine focused and a little less community focused, they created this time that we're in. Okay, so then and then like personal fate, which I also think links to like monarchs and that type of thing, right? Because sibyls and seers used to give them that information. All right, so Roman and church influence, 300 to 1200 CE. As Christianity rose, anything associated with star worship, feminine cycles, or lunar calendars was suppressed. The church adopted a solar calendar, Gregorian, and discredited indigenous star wisdom. The Pleiades, often connected to feminine deities, became myth. And then the Renaissance, 1400 to 1600 CE. Western astrology got refined as an intellectual science, divorced from ceremony and spirit and rooted in personality interpretation rather than cosmic relationship. So I was like, okay, well, who taught him? Who taught Ptolemy? All right. And basically, like, the saying is, we went from the stars speak to us and tell us when to gather, plant, rest, and remember, to you're a Capricorn with Mercury in retrograde, here's your lucky number, which isn't completely true. It's a little deeper than that, but anyhow, okay. So I was like, this guy basically created a technology that shifted us from the matriarchal relational time into patriarchal mechanical time, okay? And then Ptolemy and how his chart system came to be. Claudius Ptolemaeus. I feel like I've talked about him before in a different video. Lived in Roman Egypt around 100 to 170 CE. He wrote the Terra Biblos, the functional text of modern Western astrology. He also wrote the Almagest, a massive work on astronomy based on Babylonian and Greek sources. Now, tetrahedron used to be, so tetra in general is linked to God's name. So Yahweh, which is supposedly we're not even supposed to be saying these words, and then they are considered magic. So if you have a tetrabiblos, is that like it's like a charted Bible, but tetrabiblos, the foundational text of modern Western astrology. Okay, and we talked about Biblos in one of my older videos. There's a town there's a place called Byblos, and this is where people would go and get paper. And so, anyhow, when did Ptolemy's astrology come to form? The Babylonian sky calendars, 200 BCE to 500 BCE, the Babylonians had star charts, lunar omens, and seasonal markers, including the Pleiades. Their zodiacs were used to track kings' fates, weather patterns, and eclipses, not personal horoscopes. The system was observational and priest-driven, rooted in temple knowledge. And this does go back to the Sibyls and Cybele, and goddess names like Inanna. Okay. Egyptian star wisdom. The Egyptians tracked Sirius, Orion, and the Pleiades with sacred temples aligned to the stars. Goddesses' knowledge was encoded in the sky. Isis, aka Sirius, Nut, the Milky Way, Hathor, the seven cows, aka the Pleiades. This system was ceremonial and goddess-based, often tied to the Nile cycle and lunar calendars. Greek interpretation and reduction. By Ptolemy's time, indigenous and goddess-based wisdom was being extracted and recoded into more rational and male authoritized systems. You know how I feel about the whole rational. Oh my goodness. Ptolemy took what was left of the oral traditions and fit it into geometric charts based on 12 equal signs, each ruled by planets. The chart became individualized, a map of one's fate rather than a ceremonial relationship with time. Who taught Ptolemy? This is where it gets murky. There's no official teacher named. But we know, this is what they say, he had access to the Library of Alexandria, which still exists. It's just not, we don't get to go to it. They burned it down, just like they burned down, anyhow. And that library contained translated African, Mesopotamian, and Indian knowledge, or indigenous knowledge. Much of what he used came from older Chaldean and Egyptian records, but he stripped the goddess out of them. His version of astrology was solar-focused, male-ruled, and mathematical, removing the cycles of the moon, blood, breath, and ceremony. So, and then there are writings in the Greek world where Artemis' wisdom and presence were either erased or minimized. Some even suggest that early versions of Artemis were far older and connected to pre-Hellenic moon priestess cults called Leto, Hecate, or even older to the Anatolian goddess like Cybele, the Sibyls. So while Ptolemy may have written against Artemis directly, his reframing of the heavens pushed aside the divine feminine orientation to time, space, and nature. Okay, and then I had learned, yes, in the Kabbalah, which is named after a goddess, Cybele, and Hebrew mysticism, the Tetragrammaton, which is the YHWH, the four-letter name of God, was considered so powerful and sacred it was not to be spoken aloud. Tetra, 4, was not just a number, it was symbolic for the divine structure of a world, the elements, and a manifestation of God force into form, which had to be taught by the mothers. And so I think as the mothers declined and all this information, these people decided to use the magic. They're like, well, okay, let's use it, because naming the text tetrabiblos, meaning 4 books, was absolutely not neutral and invokes the idea of a divine code in binding. Okay, and so you codify the stars, you mechanize astrology, and you move completely away from the oral, ceremonial, and timekeeping of the stars that originated, which were based a lot on the Pleiades, and that. Okay, so I have a theory that's maybe when Marduk became the changer of the skies, so to speak. Like, we literally took the goddess star time information and replaced it with this 12 zodiac information. And so moon goddess cults before the takeover were moon goddess lineages, and they were usually associated with Hecate, Artemis. Oh, okay. I better hurry this up. Okay. Okay. I'm still recording, but real quickly. Selene, Greek but originally older, like the Anatolian or Thracian cults. Ninhursag and Nana and Ishtar, Sumerian. Nut and Hathor, Egyptian. Ixchel, Maya, moon, fertility. And then we have Anat and Astarte. And we know what happened there. Okay. So these were lunar-based, matrilineal, and highly ceremonial. And then what I'll do in my next video is I'm going to go into the blue star and blue light sisterhood, link it back to the Pleiades, ask some more questions, but just kind of leave it here with y'all with we're onto something. We're onto something with the different system, and now I want to relook at everything I'm considering and give a little more focus to Sirius and the Pleiades. Specifically the Pleiades. Like, I want to learn about this. Did y'all know about the Dogon and the Pleiades? We all know about Sirius and the Dogons, and everyone. So it's correct. We had a different map. We had a different astrology. Okay, thanks for listening, sharing and subscribing, watching, giving your comments.